Okay, good evening and welcome. My name is Brian Spraggins, and for those of you I have not yet met, I am the graduation specialist with the Lewis and Clark High School Gear Up program. And on behalf of my good colleague, Suzanne McGuire, and myself, we'd like to welcome you to the third in a series of 4 family workshops that we are putting on this year. The topic of tonight's workshop is the labor market of the future. And as most of us are very well aware, the labor market is rapidly changing, as is the global economy that surrounds it. And so what that requires of us, I think, is some new ways of thinking about work, new ways of thinking about how we prepare for that. And so what we've assembled for you tonight is a panel of very wonderful guests who will be introduced in just a moment. Very fortunate to have them, who will talk about their experiences here in this realm and give us some insights about what they think and know is coming and how you can be thinking about preparation for what's ahead of you. We're also very fortunate to have Lisa White, who is the Director of Career and Technical Education here in Spokane Public Schools, and she will be moderating tonight. And so I just want to remind you all as well, this is a panel discussion, so they're going to have some introductory remarks, and then it's really kind of a discussion, an intimate one as it turns out here, but a good one I'm sure. And if you are the type that doesn't want to ask questions again, I do have note cards up here if you didn't bring them, and we have pens, and we would be happy to pass those out. Just raise your hand and let me know, and I'm happy to bring one over to you. So with that, I will turn it over to Lisa. Thank you.
So is this one mine up here? Or is there one? Okay, sorry about that, folks. How many people have been on this stage like this before, up with the microphone? It's a little intimidating up here. This is a big place. I just want to say thank you for attending tonight. The folks that you're going to meet up here on the panel have worked a very full, long day. I know, I can already tell. And they're spending their time with us tonight to tell you more about the things that they look for when they are hiring, when they are looking for people that they want to fill their organization and people that they want to keep here in Spokane, or hire for their agency and send maybe even all the way across the world, because we do have organizations that are representing companies that actually have offices all over our country and all over the world. So I think it should be a fun night tonight. I wanted to introduce them and let them talk just a little bit about themselves, because they do all have pretty extensive bios, and it would be silly for me to read them all. But I want to introduce on the far end of the panel, Mr. Mike Senske. He's with Pearson Packaging. He is a good friend of mine and also part of the manufacturing community, which is huge in the Spokane region. There are roughly 562 manufacturers in our region, and they're producing parts for equipment for around the world. And Mike is a CEO who does have companies all over the country and all over the world, and so he's going to talk a little bit about that. I have Shawna Beese-Bjurstrom. I totally get it. And she is an RN, and she has an MBA and has been working in healthcare for at least a decade now. And right now she is responsible for the rural residency program for rural nurses. And so she's going to talk a little bit about that. And she's from Idaho, so crossing the border a little bit, but not too far away. So thinking about where could you be that's in the region. And the region doesn't always just mean Spokane. That could mean over in North Idaho. We have Mark Smith. He is the Executive Director of Human Resources. Did I say that right, Mark? And he is doing all the hiring over at Providence Sacred Heart. Everybody knows where Providence Sacred Heart is? Students? Which way do you think it is? That way? Very good. It's that way. Very good. So he's going to talk about the types of people that they hire and also that big hospital. And I believe, and tell me if I'm right, do you do hiring for all 3 locations or at least 2 of them, right? Everything in Spokane and Stevens County. They have thousands of employees. We're constantly fighting with them, Spokane Schools, is to see who is the largest employer, say the Providence or us or the military. And finally, and I'm going to pull this up on my iPad. I thought I would be really good on my iPad tonight. I don't know if this is going to happen very well, but finally, I'm pulling up on the very well. I apologize. We have Michelle Aikman, and she is I would say her bio says rock star, but she is a consultant for hiring, and she is a world-class resume builder, and she can get you a job. So she's going to talk about what it takes to get people a job and what she does making that a job, writing resumes for you. So I'm hoping that they can all talk a little bit about who they are, what they do, and then answer our first prompt. So Mike, do you want to go ahead and get started? We pass you the mic?
Sure.
Okay.
Thank you. Thanks for taking time out of your schedules today, to join us and kind of engage in this dialogue. So my name's Michael Senske. I'm president and CEO of a company here in town called Pearson Packaging Systems. What we do is we manufacture capital equipment, packaging machinery that's primarily used by Fortune 500 food, beverage, and personal care companies here in the United States and North America and actually around the world. So our customers are Kraft, Unilever, Miller Coors, Coca-Cola, Procter & Gamble, Pfizer, people like that. So if you've ever watched TV shows like How It's Made, we don't actually manufacture the products. What we do is we build the machines that then manufacture and package the products. So we build those machines here in Spokane, and then once we check them out and test them and make sure that we built them to the customer specifications, we ship them to their manufacturing facilities throughout the world. So our largest market is the United States. We sell, in Mexico, in Canada, in Korea, in Vietnam, in China, Australia, really all around the world. And I guess a couple of comments, we were asked to provide, kind of a little bit of an introduction here about one of the things that's affecting our business, and I think most businesses, is just continued globalization and really just increased competition, both domestically and from foreign countries. So the world's really gotten a lot smaller over the last several years. And so from our perspective, we're just seeing, it used to be 30 or 40 years ago, almost all of our competitors were primarily based in North America and mostly the United States. And now the average competitor, could be just randomly, located anywhere, throughout the world. And I would say that that's going to continue, and frankly, things are getting more and more competitive really on a daily basis. A lot of people talk about manufacturing and manufacturing going away, in the United States. The fact of the matter is a lot of highly engineered products like ours, will continue to be built in the United States. There's really no better place to build them really anywhere in the world. So the myth that manufacturing's kind of left the United States, certain kinds of repetitive, high volume, low variability manufacturing have left, the United States, and in many cases they're coming back to the United States or closer to the United States, but the type of work we do will always be located here. And they tend to be highly skilled jobs, so they're not the types of jobs where you're kind of just snapping a widget into place over and over and doing repetitive tasks. We have a lot of mechanical engineers, a lot of controls engineers and electrical engineers. Our assembly technicians are incredibly skilled technicians. The parts fabrication, the parts that go into building our equipment, are highly engineered, typically, and the manufacturing that is required to support them are also advanced manufacturing jobs. So not really the typical kind of 19th century or 20th century manufacturing, jobs that you might think of. And really, from my perspective, I guess the last thing that I would say is that, that competition that I talked about earlier. It's really, really important, for continuous improvement. We live kind of under just in a more competitive world, and we're constantly striving to improve our products, to improve the quality, to make sure that they're globally competitive. And really, at the end of the day, that's what we're looking for in a workforce, for people who are dedicated and educated in those advanced types of engineering and manufacturing jobs, but that also are very familiar with the principles of continuous improvement, lean manufacturing, Six Sigma, things like that. So, I think at a high level, I'll let it go.
My name is Shawna Beese-Bjurstrom, and I'm an adjunct professor at Idaho State University, and it's actually in the professional development. So what we do is we remotely teach. I actually live here in Spokane and teach remotely CNOs and emerging leaders within rural hospitals all around the nation, and provide them with some background in adaptive leadership, change management, using data to drive your change management initiatives, and then also appreciative inquiry, which is a form of gleaning the best out of your system. And so we do that because, as you can imagine, if they live in rural areas, they maybe don't have access to a lot of professional development opportunities right there in their community. So Idaho State University provides that for them. I am only a part-time adjunct professor, so the other half of my life is very much like you will find yourselves in, looking for my next opportunity. I am a former chief operating officer of a rural hospital myself, and the pearls that I have to share today is, number one, in the last 5 years, both as the chief operating officer of a rural hospital and then director of business development here at one of the local hospitals, I have been through 5 reorganizations in the last 5 years. Complete reorganizations, changing the boxes on the org chart, and fundamentally having your job change. And so the very first lesson I would want to teach you is to survive in the new economy, you have to become adaptable. Your learning curve will be probably, you know, like this your whole life. And so don't ever think when you get your diploma or when you get your degree or when you finish your program, it's all over. It's never over. To commit to being gainfully employed is to commit to always learning. The second thing is there's a lot of talk now about a freelance economy, particularly with knowledge work, people who have leadership positions or engineering positions, architecture, and I want to say that you will probably be your own career's best advocate. You definitely want to lean on the leaders that are in different organizations that you are in, especially through human resources. They provide a valuable leadership development, career development, but at the end of the day, it's going to be you seeking out those opportunities and plotting your own course. But I want to give you some good news. Warren Buffett, he uses this for his investing. He says he never gets bogged down in the macro. And so as you graduate and as you go to college and as you hear things about freelance economy and you're not going to get to stay at the same employer all your life, and maybe someday there will be a world without jobs altogether and you'll be a consultant, you have to balance the macro versus the, you know, micro. Trends are just that. Be aware so that you can advocate for yourself over the long range. But at the end of the day, take a look at what's around and advocate for yourself. There's still jobs out there. There's still many opportunities for the people who are seeking them and preparing themselves for it. So don't ever allow yourself to be disheartened by the scare tactics of these big trends that we hear about. So good luck.
Thanks, Shawna. First, I wanted to say thank you all for letting me join you this evening. This is a great experience for all of you, and I hope that we can give you some pearls that will be useful for you. I'm Mark Smith, and I'm the Human Resource Director for Providence Healthcare. Providence Healthcare, it consists of Sacred Heart and Holy Family. We have a very nice medical group, now over 500 physicians. And it also includes our hospitals in Stevens County, St. Joseph Hospital in Chewelah and Mount Carmel Hospital in Colville. I'm just a part of Providence, so when we think about Providence Healthcare, we're a region within the broader Providence Health Services. So not quite as glamorous as Mike. I can't tell you that we can send you around the world, but I can tell you that we could send you to Anchorage or Renton, Washington, or Portland, Oregon, Torrance, California, or Missoula, Montana, in addition to Spokane. So all told, Providence now is a system of about 67,000 employees, about 32 hospitals, 325 different physician clinics. So we've grown quite a bit over the years. What's really intriguing is my span of control for Providence Healthcare is about 7,000 people. But here in the Spokane-Stevens County market, they're actually closer to 10,000 Providence employees. So beyond what I work in, which is primarily our hospitals and our medical group, we have a very strong affiliation with PAML, the lab, which somebody pointed this way for Sacred Heart, so I guess I would point quite that way for PAML. We have PAML. We have a relationship with Inland Imaging, so if you have PAD X-rays, you've probably gone to Inland Imaging. We have a business office in Liberty Lake. We also have an affiliation, strong partnership with INHS. So when you see choppers flying over LC, heading to the hospital, it's probably INHS. So we have a pretty broad touch here in Spokane and Stevens County, which would also tell you that there are a lot of jobs available in healthcare, and I think Shawna alluded to that, and I would concur. So for every educational level, there's probably an opportunity within healthcare. For any interest that you have, there's probably something available in healthcare. If you like math, there are accountant jobs, financial analyst jobs, and I would tell you that those are going to continue to be important. If you love working with people, you name it. I think starting with the nurse, being a nursing assistant, working in a gift shop. So I think you think about our traditional jobs, physicians and nurses, lab techs, people who do imaging. There are a variety of different jobs. What I think is really exciting is today, and I'll temper it first by saying, this is probably one of the times in healthcare where we've probably seen more seismic shifts than ever. Shawna, you probably would concur with that. And it starts with the Affordable Health Care Act. Your folks know that is something else probably, and you've heard a thing or two about that. But the Affordable Health Care Act really is not only changing how we, as individuals, take insurance, but it really changes healthcare and how it exists. You know, when you think about Spokane, one of the first things you see is the Heart on the Hill. It's just a bit giant. But I would tell you that the hospital that size is something of a dinosaur. And I think our future in healthcare will shift a lot away from hospitals. And why is that? Because a hospital is a little bit more expensive than your doctor. So during this time of seismic change, there are things that we are trying to understand. How do we run a hospital effectively today? How do we do that knowing that many people who now have to get health insurance have applied for health insurance that pays at a different level than we've traditionally paid? Knowing that it's expensive to get care in a hospital. And so you start to see that the response to that is to be really discerning in what you provide in a hospital and to create great alliances. And so that starts with having good physician practices and really starting to build a medical network. It also means beginning to find different ways to partner with individuals. We've been very spoiled over the years in Spokane. We had a great relationship between Empire and with Providence. Not every community had that. A lot of competition in healthcare. And not like Rosars or Albertsons where a dozen eggs for 49 cents at a Rosars means you're going to do the same thing at Albertsons. Competition in healthcare often means that it makes it more expensive, and that's really where we have to get away from. So the opportunities in the future are going to be working in clinical practices, looking at affiliations, doing things with people who weren't partners yesterday. For you as professionals, I think what's exciting is there are going to be a lot of opportunities. We don't know what 20% of the jobs in healthcare will look like just 5 years from now. We can tell you that we think we know those. We think that we're going to need people who are medical economists, people who start to forecast what a community is going to need for health. We can tell you that we may need more analysts. We might tell you that we need more midwives or doulas, but we're guessing. And so what's exciting is, and I think to Shawna's point, what's exciting about healthcare today is you may be able to create your job doing it in a healthcare setting. So I think those are the opportunities. We'll have traditional opportunities. We're going to have unique, new, exciting opportunities. And from a broad range of interests, whether you like math, whether you like science, whether you like working with people, whether you're entrepreneurial, whether you want to complete your degree at a high school level, or whether you want to move on, I think there are a lot of exciting opportunities and great future in healthcare.
I'm so excited that Michelle's going to talk now because she's just listened to them tell you, and probably if you're a high school, you're sitting here going, concur, affiliate, lean, Six Sigma, what does that mean? But if you're an adult in the room, you're probably going, yeah, hey, maybe I want to go get a job at one of those companies. And so Michelle is going to tell us what she just heard and how you would put that out there, right? Is that going to, I mean, how would you apply for all those things, and what kind of person are they looking for, Michelle?
Right. So the first thing that I want to do is just give you a little bit of background about who I am and the perspective that I come from, because I think that will help frame what I'm gonna say to you and why I'm saying it. So my background, I grew up, my father worked for Lockheed Martin for 30 years. He was a very loyal employee. He retired. That was life, right? He got a pension. And throughout me growing up and going to school, all of a sudden pensions started going away. And then the loyalty that employees had to companies started wavering a little bit because that pension wasn't there. Your goal was no longer to go find a company and a job and work there for 30 years and retire.
So when I was in college, that was about the time that people started moving more often. You had 401ks, so you were responsible for investing in yourself so that you could retire. And I think that was just the start of the changes that we've seen. So I decided in high school, everyone asked, what do you want to do when you grow up? And it's like you had to make a decision, right? And so I said, well, I like science, and I don't like that and that and that and that, so I guess I'll do this. And so I got my degree in that. And at that time it was, well, that's what I'm gonna do, is go do that, because I got my degree in that. So I busted my hump and got the best grades that I could, because that meant that I was gonna get a job if I had the best grades. And I graduated college in 2002, which is right when everything crashed. So I went to a very nice school in Colorado, and there was like a 90% placement rate by the time graduation came around. Basically, if you went to that school, you got a good job. And my year, it dropped to like 40 or something. So it no longer, just getting good grades wasn't good enough anymore. The jobs were not there. And so I've kind of lived a life in that era. Everyone before me still had those jobs, and my class and beyond had to fight for them. There were people who graduated and were out of jobs, never had their first job for a year. They went and started waiting tables and doing other things, and then it became even harder for them to get a job because they never had that first one. And so then I think my school and other schools started learning, wait a second, things have changed and we need to adjust. And so they started promoting, listen, you need to get internships. Because if you get an internship, which means you work during the summer while you're in college, then these companies can see who you are and you can kind of prove yourself to them and they'll like you, and then hopefully you'll get a full-time job out of it. It's no longer just good grades anymore. You gotta have that extra. So that's kind of where I graduated in college. Now, I had some extra situations in that I married my husband who's military, and all of a sudden I was in locations that where I got my degree, it was very regionally specific. There were no jobs there. And people would look at me like, why are you here? And as soon as they found out that I was military affiliated, they said, well, I don't want to invest in you because you're short term. So I had to battle that challenge. Even though I was like top of my game, I had 4.0, I had this great degree from a prestigious school, they didn't even want to take the time to talk with me. So I really struggled with the filters, which you all hear about that. When you create a resume and you submit it online, there's electronic filtering that goes in. And a lot of times people are disqualified based on that. So you never even get to talk to someone like him because your document is already filtered out of the process. So I had to start getting really, really creative with the way that I was approaching employers. And I had to really think about how they were interpreting some of the things that I had against me. And I had to make some arguments that I didn't know how to argue, but I came up with creative ways to do it. And I've ended up getting some really interesting jobs, but man, did I have to fight tooth and nail. The truth is, that is the case for everybody now. It's not just for me. And so after pursuing my engineering career for a number of years and making lots of changes and fighting that fight, I finally got to the point where I said, I'm really tired of fighting this fight. I would rather take my energy and everything that I've learned through this fight and help other people fight this fight, and also put my energy to helping employers see why they should change, because this fight shouldn't be this way. So that's what I'm doing. I've started my own business, and it's dedicated towards those things. I help professionals navigate this complex system that can be really frustrating. And basically, the nutshell is you have to be cream of the crop to have opportunities available to you, and you have to put effort into it, like significant effort. So getting good grades isn't enough anymore. Going to the best school isn't enough. You have to be able to advocate for yourself, just as they said. You have to know what you have to offer, and you have to be able to communicate that. So the three things that I wanted to talk about with relation to the question that was phrased about the global economy and what's coming in the future. So I've had a lot of opportunities to step back and view what's going to happen. What are my career options as I move forward, and where do I see this industry going? How can I sit here and advise people if I haven't thought about what's in the future? So I'm kind of on the extreme side. I believe that it's only going to get more competitive. I believe that we're going to move away from an employee-employer relationship, and I think it is going to be more where you have to operate, as a consultant and a freelance. So it's not just you go and get that job. I think that people are going to be responsible for continuing to make sure that they have work, and I think employers are going to be really attracted to those short-term contract type relationships with people. I could be wrong, but that's my projection. So if that was the case, which I'm always think of the worst, hope for the best, plan for the worst. If that's the case, what that means for you guys as high school freshmen is you need to start thinking about what can you do to differentiate yourself from your peers. And not just at your school, but as you said, it's global. So how are you going to differentiate yourself and make sure that you're competitive? So I think that it'll be competitive on the entire spectrum. So, as you said, if you step out of high school, don't go to college, and graduate, you're going to be competing with people across the world who can do it faster and better. Okay, so think about that when you make your choices about education. That's what you're competing against, and the opportunities are going to be smaller and smaller. EO levels, those are cutthroat, and if you aren't on the top of your game, you're going to lose out on those. So my point is, you have to raise your game. It's a competitive market out there. So to be successful in doing that, make choices that are going to differentiate yourself. When you make those choices, really stop and think about how are those skills going to translate. So if you're doing a school play, how has that experience going to position you to be successful tomorrow? It goes back to how he said, you have to engage being a learner. You don't have to choose when you decide on your college degree that you're going to do that for the rest of your life. You just have to figure out how am I going to be able to use the skills that I learned through that education to be successful in whatever it is that I'm going to pursue. Okay? The third thing, and Shawna alluded to this, is you have to be able to manage your career. And I'm a huge advocate for that. I mean, I'm just like, you have to take responsibility for understanding what your options are, putting in the work to make sure that you are packaged and polished, ready to talk about yourself, conquering some of those fears. It's just not an option anymore. So I second a lot of what has been set up here today, and call me a pessimist, but I'd rather talk about, what could possibly happen and prepare for that. And you guys are really at a really exciting time because you guys have a lot at your advantage compared to us even, and I still consider myself young, but apparently I'm not. So you guys have a lot at your advantage. You're very mobile and agile, and I mean, you pick up on technology like nothing else. And so use that, recognize that you have that to your advantage as you move forward.
Thank you. So I'm thinking about what they're talking about, and in our district, we have a T24 push. 4. Anyone? A couple of people. I see all the principals. T24. All of our students prepared for technical 2-year or 4-year before they graduate. And in order to do that in a district our size was 27,000 students, with some of our students in our buildings where we have 91% of our students qualifying for free and reduced lunch, we have to start earlier and earlier and earlier. And so we're actually talking to kindergartners about what they want to do. We're talking to second graders, we're talking to fourth graders. And so I think you're right, it is going deeper and deeper and deeper. And indeed, we're saying to our high school students and to you as ninth graders, you need to get an internship. You need to get a job shadow. You need to go out and find out what you want to do. And part of it is because we want you to do that while it's free and not when your parents or the state or somebody else is paying college tuition or other things that you're using and then go, gosh, I really didn't like that when you had that opportunity here. And so thinking about what you all said, what would be the greatest thing that you ever did for yourself to be an employee? And maybe one of the worst things that you may have ever done that you would say to somebody else, don't ever do that.
I'm going to use 2 R's to give guidance. The best thing that I have done in my career is to be resilient. And I think as Michelle and Shawna have mentioned, Shawna's gone through 5 reorganizations. I can tell you that I've gone through several reorganizations. the economy wasn't so great. But what I have found is that if you can be resilient, you will thrive. And I can tell you in my own experience here recently, when I came to Spokane for Providence about 8 years ago, I was actually in organizational development. That would take us the rest of the evening to try to describe organizational development, so I won't do that. But many of the skills from organizational development, the ability to facilitate with groups, the ability to help mediate conflicts, the ability to do job analysis and understand what critical behaviors are really important for an employee to be successful, are really transferable to the role that I have now in human resources. So I would tell you that when I stepped into this role about a year ago, I knew nothing about labor relations. People will tell you that I still don't know anything about labor relations. But the skills that I had in facilitating and working with groups and helping to mediate conflict really transferred. And so while I didn't envision a few years ago that I would be overseeing human resources for an area of 7,000, here I am because of those skills. The other R that I'll share with you is rigid. So the biggest mistake that I ever made in my career is pigeonholing myself and saying this is the only thing that I can do. And that's really critical because when you do that, and when I did that, I denied myself an opportunity to continue to learn. I denied myself an opportunity to grow, and frankly, from an employment perspective, I told the people I worked for that I really can't do what you think I have the potential to do. And so I think it's really critical that as you go, and you're already learning this, as here you are early in high school, you've already learned many skills about being resilient. Not everything's gone your way, but you found a way to thrive and prosper. That skill will take you a long way. Be open. The last thing I would share with you is, I'm not as young as everybody else at this table. The gray hair gives it away, I suppose. I thought my generation would not have to worry about any advanced degree to continue to grow professionally. I did not think I would need a master's degree. And I thought I would pass that by, but guess what? It didn't. So in my early 40s, I went back to school to get a master's degree. And again, that was resilience. If it had been rigid, I would have said no, and I wouldn't have had the opportunity. So those are the two R's that I would leave you with as you think about what's critical for you to grow, and what's critical to prevent you from being successful. Because as Shawna and Michelle say, we are working into an entrepreneurial economy. It may be as a consultant, but I also think, frankly, you can be a consultant within the organization you work if you're open to looking at different opportunities.
One of the things that I would say that was one of the best decisions and best things I ever did in my career was really being willing to move from one sector, the technology sector, really taking the skills and abilities that I had developed there and actually applying them in a completely different sector, which is manufacturing. So I used to work at Microsoft Corporation after I got out of college and lived in the Seattle area, and honestly thought that technology was probably going to be the industry that I was in for the rest of my life. And an opportunity basically came up here in the Spokane area to work at my current employer, Pearson Packaging Systems. And the fact of the matter is that I never thought I'd ever work in the manufacturing industry, really ever. I hadn't opened my mind to it. It was something that I wasn't at the time passionate about. And at first I was very resistant to the opportunity to even look into, the positions that were open here in Spokane, and really thought I'd stay in tech. And it was actually my wife, Jennifer, we've been married a couple of years, that, had said, hey, you should really look into this. There's really an opportunity here. And I guess the thing is that willingness, to look elsewhere and not just say, okay, I'm gonna just pigeonhole myself, in one particular industry, but I'm gonna look outside that industry, because again, the skills, the abilities, the experience that you develop, working in many industries is really applicable to a lot of other industries, and frankly, in many cases, it allows you to go into that new industry with a different, set of eyes, a different perspective that oftentimes is missing and can be very, very valuable. So I would encourage people to consider that. I would say the worst thing that I ever did from a career perspective was just my first review period at Microsoft. I was out of school. I had a job description. I knew that I was going to be evaluated on my performance every 6 months. And I had a list of objectives, and I exceeded every one of those objectives. And when I put what my view of my performance was, I'm like, oh, I've knocked this out of the park. This is great. And it really hit me very, very quickly that I wasn't being measured against the objectives that were on a piece of paper. I was literally being measured against every single other person doing the same or a similar job, and I was competing against those individuals. And frankly, that set of objectives was the bare minimum, essentially, really, to remain employed at Microsoft. And so it became very, very clear to me that in order to create value and in order to move upwards through the company, that I was really going to have to put in a tremendous amount more effort than I was. I was absolutely willing to do that. So I would just say, really clearly, and I wouldn't call it a mistake. I would just it was just a learning experience more than anything. But as students, you're really competing with people in this school. You're competing for jobs with people in this community. You're competing globally, for jobs or positions, in universities. Just be aware of that and really realize, that the time and the effort that you're putting into what you're doing now and what you're going to do in the future is largely going to, it's not going to guarantee success, but it's going to give you a better chance at success, and I think it's just important for you to understand that.
I love the R&R. I'm going to just steal it and use it for every speech from here on out. No, I would 100% agree, whether we call it adaptability or resilience. I think that openness is completely something that you give yourself if you want to be successful. Whether it's going back and getting your master's degree, whether it's recognizing there's just some trends that are not going to reverse, and instead of bucking it, just go back and take that computer science class, even if you're 40. I think that being open to where your life and your career is taking you is of the utmost importance. I would say, much to what you said, I'm not going to say this is the worst thing I've ever done, but it's definitely a gift that I've given myself recently in letting it go. You're going to get out there and it is going to be competitive. Michelle just absolutely alluded to that, every other panel member. And I think that we can deficit ourselves by getting too competitive within that environment and not giving ourselves grace. There's always going to be the second chance. That's that macro versus micro. You may have took a step back, but there's always a way to recover. And so giving yourself the grace to recover, giving yourself the grace to pivot when you maybe need to go and round out your education, or you need to set the bar a different place, and take care of yourself too. Work is part of your life. It should not be your whole life. And I say that not only in a good, I want you to be happy people and society members, but I actually think that's going to increase your employability too. There's something powerful about being a centered human being who can put things into its appropriate place and just adapt to that. So give yourself some grace.
Okay, so I have my own experience and perspective, and then I'm working with people who are trying to advance their career. Some of them are very happy with what they're doing and just want to position themselves for opportunities, and some of them are in crisis mode, they're unemployed, they're trying to make things work, they're trying to fix the situation. So I kind of bring all those perspectives at play when I say the best thing you can do is look at your life in a very positive way. Look at everything that you have done in a positive way. Look at all of the back steps and the falls and the mistakes. Figure out what's positive about them and learn from them and be able to talk about them in a positive way. Even some of the most, initially perceived negative things that I've experienced have really helped me if I can explain them in a positive way. So there's ways to get around it when you talk about it on paper, and that's why I love what I do, because people can come to me and they feel like they have no options, and I can expose them and open them to, no, look, because you experienced that, now you can do this, or this, and it's all about reframing your perspective. So as you're going through your life, if you feel like, I'm not special, I can't compete, I don't have anything above anybody else, really, really stop and think about what makes you different, okay? Even the most boring person The most average person has something that differentiates them from other people, and it just takes that time to stop and figure out what that is. So think positive. And I think the other side about, you know, what's the worst thing you can do for your career is giving into that. When you feel like you have no options, and just accepting that reality that you created for yourself. Because then you get into this mode of, I don't have options, I'm not capable, I can't do what I want, can't do anything. And that's just a vicious, horrible cycle, and it's so hard to get out of. So really focus on trying to keep your frame positive as you move forward, okay? And you will have backsteps, and you will feel, you know, bad about them, or, you know, you will feel like they're mistakes, and you may sometimes retreat and feel like, oh, that was a mistake, you know? Like, for example, I had a job for 6 months and I quit. And, you know, initially someone would be like, oh, well, that was horrible, you know, you're never gonna be able to get another job. But when you stop and you look at why did I quit, and what were my reasons behind it, and is it telling on my character, you know, all those things, if I can talk about it in a positive way, then it's not gonna hold me back. So make sure that you do that for your own life.
Thank you. So do we have any questions from the audience? Did anyone write anything down? Right there. Do you want to tell us who you are and what your question is?
Sure.
Okay.
I'm Christine Baker, and I have a freshman who is not with me, obviously.
I'm actually going to give you this because we're recording.
Stand up or something?
No, I just needed him to be able to hear, so just hold it close.
So I'm Christine Schaefer. I had a couple questions, actually. The first one had to do with the specificity of college degrees. I'm kind of appalled, I guess, at the #2 and #1 degrees, I believe, in the United States as far as college students right now are political science and psychology. I guess I'm wondering what you think about trying to get a more specific degree that trains you a little more occupationally in a degree like mechanical engineering or something like that versus the more general, you know, recognizing that we need all types of people in the world. I'm guessing there's maybe a few too many psychology majors. I don't know. Your thoughts on that? And any of you can address that question.
So it's kind of an interesting, it's an interesting question because, you know, part of when you get, you know, a 4-year degree, for example, part of what we're looking for as an employer is that it's just broadening your view of the world. It's not even necessarily what you're learning. So if people have a political science or a history degree or a psychology degree or something like that, oftentimes what it demonstrates to us is really that, you know, they've obviously had to demonstrate and establish the ability to critically think. They have a broader view of the world in which they're operating, but there aren't really any specific things about any of those degrees that immediately make you hireable for a very specific position. With us, with mechanical and electrical and controls engineering, the good news is if you get a very specific degree like that, you're immediately employable in a field that is very well defined, and you can add value, you know, right away in that area. Interestingly enough, oftentimes those, from our perspective, those career paths, they don't understand anything about anything ever. You know, and really, I mean that. It's one of the problems we have. We get mechanical engineers, incredibly bright people, very, very good engineers, and when you actually explain to them that there's this concept called a customer and that we're trying to actually provide specific value, and they're like, well, but I want to design it this way, why? They've been kind of very, very narrowly taught how to apply certain, you know, mathematics and design philosophies to design parts, but they're kind of at times missing, you know, some of the broader things, you know, that a psychology major would have. So I guess what I would say is there's pros and cons to both. You know, I think, and I would also say is that there's also, I'll go one step further and just say there's not even necessarily the need to, you know, get a psychology degree or an engineering degree or a 4-year degree for many types of jobs that are out there that are extremely well paying. And a lot of times what I find is that we put students that really don't necessarily want to be in a 4-year program into a 4-year program. They kind of just take, you know, whatever they take, and they end up coming out with some sort of a degree, but frankly have left behind whatever passion they had and don't really know what they want to do, as opposed to maybe taking a vocational, you know, going through and getting a vocational, you know, certificate or degree, or going and getting their AA or specializing in some other area. So you know, I mean, because we consume engineers, I would say that, you know, I'm all for people getting STEM education because I think that's really our business model. But I think there's a lot of value in it just at a high level for those other degrees as well, just from a critical thinking perspective.
I would 100% agree with that, and I also think that all education is good. I mean, you have your transferable skills that come with any degree. I think one of the most important things about a bachelor's degree is when you're old enough to figure out where you're going and what your next step is, it allows you to jump into a master's program without the big barrier of 4 more years to even get to the what you need to accomplish. But I think all learning, traditional and non-traditional learning, is important, and it builds into that that package that is you. So I don't think work towards any degree is lost, and I don't think that I really feel very similar to you. I mean, nursing was important to me, and I had a biology in nursing, but I was super happy I went to Gonzaga because it also armed us with philosophy, religion, and critical thinking.
I would concur with what Mike and Shawna are saying. I think when I think about a degree program, I think it's useful to continue to learn and grow, and that may be in a 4-year cycle. And as like I said, that could be in a 2-year technical program. When I think about the degree, unless it's really something that's required by a license in healthcare, you know, they won't let me touch a patient. They won't let me insert a PICC line, and that's probably okay because I don't have a nursing degree. They won't let me be a med technologist because I don't have that background, and that's okay. So if you have a passion, that's a good path to take. Many people, you know, ask your parents. Some of your parents may not have known what they wanted to do when they were 20, 21, 23. I don't know yet what I'm going to do when I grow up either. So we're going to continue. That's going to continue to evolve. I think what's important in pursuing the education is, just as Mike and Shawna said, there's that development of critical thinking skills is huge. When I think about some of the key behaviors that we look at for employees, less about the technical skills, less about the knowledge, because in many instances we can teach the technical, the knowledge and the experience will come. It's about the behavior. And what kind of behaviors do we look for? We look for people who can communicate. Can they express an idea? We look for people who can work with others. Can they collaborate? And that looks different at different levels, but can they work well with other people? We look for people who can make decisions, who really can exercise critical thinking skills, are willing to make decisions. We look for people that will initiate action. They see something and they will move toward it. Those are the types of behaviors that we look for. And I think finally, we look for people who have a thirst to continue to grow, whether it's applied learning, and I think as Mike alluded to in manufacturing, many jobs, and I would say in healthcare as well, where the learning is a snippet and there's an immediate opportunity to go and practice it. So that applied learning or the continuous learning, continuing to move on those journeys. But those are the behaviors that we look for. When we do our best hiring, it's because we look for that spectrum of behavior. When we do our worst hiring, it's because we go after knowledge and experience and we don't think about the rest of the behaviors. So I think that education is really critical. And again, unless that educational path is required for where you want to go, the continuing education journey is what's most important.
So I'm a huge STEM proponent. I have an engineering degree. My husband has an engineering degree. Love it. And there's a lot of data out there to support that there's going to be a high need for STEM, that you will be very employable right out the gate, as they said, for STEM. However, think about a world without all of the other, everything has to offer. If it was just a STEM world, I would not want to live in that world. So I am very, very appreciative of the arts and everything that balances the STEM world. So I'm not going to stand up here and say, don't pursue that. Now, I do encounter people who have gone and spent lots and lots of money and time getting degrees and they can't find a job. Museum science, history, English, you know, those are some of, you know, that I've encountered. And those people have had to do a lot of soul searching with, okay, so I have this degree, I have this passion, but the jobs aren't there, so what am I going to do? And the ones who are successful stop and think about, how can I use that education and that experience to do something that's marketable, that I can do that still aligns with a passion, but may not have been what I originally thought or what is traditionally thought of as a student who comes out of those programs. So again, I think it goes back to the transferable skill part. You know, go get an education part. You know, what I always said in interviews is just proving that you can learn. I mean, that's what the degree is. Having that degree just shows that you can meet challenges and you can learn and you can, you know, get to the end. So whether it's in basket weaving or engineering, to me, it's how you're going to talk about it, how you're going to take what you learned and apply it to something else. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I'm very embracing also of any education opportunity. It's just what are you going to do with it? Okay.
When I, excuse me, I have a cold, so pardon the voice. When I graduated from my undergraduate program, the president of the school said, this is not a voc tech school. This is an education for a lifetime. So don't think you're coming out of here with a trade. You need to be moving on with your lives. We've trained you all in the humanities, in liberal arts, and critical thinking. Now go do something with it. This is not a voc tech school, so thank you all for reinforcing that. There has been a couple decades now that we find ourselves changing our positions frequently, moving laterally or vertically, but redefining. And some of our seniors in our society say, what's the matter with you guys? Why can't anybody keep a job like 40 years in the Postal Service or something, right? It's because we have to be chameleons and adapt. And I think adaptation is really amazing. And I don't think our current teenagers have any idea how much credit they deserve for what great chameleons they are. But thank you all for your leadership.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions out there? Oh, there's one up there. Dan Burgess.
I think Shawna alluded to it initially about data-driven decisions. I didn't hear a whole lot else up there about how information is going to be more prevalent, more abundant. They call it the 3V, you know, volume, variety, and velocity of data. Just more data coming out. You know, I'd like to hear your opinions about how you're using or how you see data or information starting to become more abundant and what you see happening in your specific industries.
You know, I'm thinking what you're saying, Dan, and I want you guys to respond to that. If you Google top 11 college majors, just go home and do that, you will find that at least 5 of those top 11 are going to talk about what you're going to tell them about data and the amount of data and that work.
I think that's going to be one of the major challenges moving forward is what do we do with all the information. I think definitely we are in a data-driven society, certainly in the sciences, health sciences, we're in a data-driven society, but what do you do with all that? And so I think in addition to the critical thinking skills and all the things we just spoke about in school, even if it's not part of your official degree program, I'd love to see it in secondary, higher education, but certainly even in elementary and middle school education, less memorization of different events and how do I filter all this massive amounts of data and make sense out of it? How can I turn data into knowledge and apply it and use it to move processes forward? So I think you really hit on that, and that's going to be one of our big challenges. We see it on the national landscape, global landscape, and I certainly think you will experience it individually in your careers.
Data is going to be significant, and when I think about healthcare, in particular, I think the really strong healthcare networks in the future will not be about hospitals and will not be about physician practices. They'll be about research, and they will leverage their electronic medical record systems to understand what's happening with the disease and what is the best way to approach that disease, what's the best way to eliminate that disease. I think that, you know, healthcare has been really focused on sickness. It's an oxymoron to call it healthcare, it's really sick care. But I think the future is about managing health. It's about managing what the community needs, and that is through data mining rich data mining, and very strong analytics. At this time in the U.S., I think for all businesses, Mike, I'd love to get your perspective, but I think strong organizations that are really going to thrive and prosper in the future are not going to be the organizations that guess. They're going to use data to make decisions rapidly, and that's how they're going to survive and thrive. I was just reading a great book on Alan Mulally at Ford, and when you read about what Alan did, it was about data. It was about the research. It was about using the information to dramatically change Ford. And you think about Ford, those top 3 companies, Ford did not take a bailout because they were analyzing and got out in front of it, and they overhauled based on the data. And I think any industry in the U.S. over the next 5 to 10 years that doesn't maximize data will flounder. So I think it's critical.
I think with that, though, there's an ownership on the individual citizens to be good consumers of data. Part of graduate school, any graduate program you're in, is teaching you how to interpret research and really vet through, was this research conducted correctly? Did these numbers match up? And I think that we will see the ownership more and more on us as individual citizens. Are the right interpretations of that data being gleaned?
Yeah, from our perspective, the data, how we really use it and how it's relevant to us is really looking at consumer trends, how people are adopting consumption trends of food, beverage, and personal care. Really understanding the demographic, that we're selling to. What industries, have what needs, where's the commonality, how we can basically maximize our engineering resources, and focus them in the right direction, and being very deliberate about fulfilling our strategy as an organization, putting together that strategy, frankly, based on data, the total available market, that exists, and being able to quantify that. And frankly, at a micro level, that's kind of at a macro management level. At a micro level, our engineers, they're generating data all the time. When they design a new component, they'll do something called HALT, or highly accelerated life testing, where they might put 1 million cycles on something, actually analyze the data. What did the temperature basically do to it? How did the properties change? Should I use this, should I use a composite instead of, a traditional material, things like that. They're making those decisions really based on data that just 10 years ago or 20 years ago wasn't really readily available to them. And so the ability to actually determine, first of all, which data is actionable. Not all data is actionable, and if you can't act on it, what's the point? But really determining what intelligence is actionable or data is actionable, and then how do you need to look at it, how do you filter it, and how best to do that. And that's where we go back even to the critical thinking. Having people, like, for example, engineers that have engineering degrees, a lot of times they're not necessarily taught like all those different things. That's something that we can't teach you, but what we really need you to have is critical thinking skills so that you can dissect that data, manipulate it, and increasingly it's how you apply what you've learned as well. I mean, okay, I'm a huge proponent of STEM. I mean, it's what we do as a company. But I'm finding that more and more also, one comment that I would just make is that it's actually how you apply, the tech, well, let's put it this way. The last time I had to do trigonometry, I can't even remember. I couldn't do it if I tried probably now. But the fact of the matter is I know how to apply the principles, and I can use a tool to look at data, to look at designs. Our engineers can do the same thing. They can apply the learning and the theory of it without actually having to do it and interpret data that way, and I think that's very important. So.
I think I don't want to address your question directly. I want to kind of take a sidestep and talk about information and data with regards to you as an individual. One of the things that myself and the older generation is still kind of coming to grips with is that we are on the grid. There's lots of information about us out there, and that makes us very uncomfortable because it didn't used to be that way. And now employers can go online and find all kinds of stuff about you. And you guys have been plugged in since, I don't know, a long time already. So what I want to talk to you about is reputation management. I don't know if you've ever heard that before, but that's something I'm educating probably your parents on. And you need to know about, and it starts now, because once things go on the internet, they live there forever. Even if you think you delete it, it does not. It is stored somewhere in some database, and it could potentially be retrieved and used as data against or for you. And I want you to be aware of that. Okay, so when you're posting photos, you're making comments, like, yes, you're a kid, I get it, I was a kid, I wanted to be a kid, I wasn't ready to grow up until I was grown up. But unfortunately for you guys, that stuff is going to live on. So be very aware of what you're putting out there, and just think about, will I, when I'm an adult, want this out there? And I know that's a really hard place to put your brain at this point in your life, but just have it in there, and add that to the little angel and devil on your shoulder when you're making decisions. Just know that it will live on, okay?
Is there any more questions? Oh, one more on the front. Oh, that's good. This is good. Ask away.
So if you look at, most of the people in this room are freshmen or parents of freshmen, and some of us have children that are a little bit older than that, juniors and seniors, so we're in the college selection process right now. So if you throw out the Stanfords and the Ivy Leagues and the Harvards and the Yales and the Princetons, and then you throw out maybe, let's say, the bottom 10% of colleges that maybe don't provide a really good education, and you're looking at just the middle 80%, obviously a lot of those colleges have overlapping programs, particularly in like business and education and engineering. Within that 80%, does it matter when you're making a selection over, this person over this person, does it matter a lot where they went to college?
I have the microphone, so I'll start. From my opinion, when I consult people and advise them, absolutely not if you can argue why. It doesn't matter. Because if that paper lands in front of him and he sees Stanford and then he sees, some school that's not Stanford, what kind of interpretation is he gonna make? Do they have it built in their filters? Is that gonna be important for them? Are they a premier employer who they're looking for Ivy League students? They may build that into their filter so that it never even gets in front of his desk to see it. So those are just the types of things that you need to consider. But if you're willing to do the work, to go around the electronic system, to interact with this guy and let him know, who you are and convince him, then, it's just extra work and a way to basically circumvent the system, which is having to happen, and I'm sure they don't appreciate it because that's a process in place, right? They're trying to use their process of applications and filtering to make it efficient. But unfortunately, some of those things that are built in, because they have so many applicants, they have to build those things in to sift people out. And what are they sifting based on? Sometimes it may be that. Now, I can't speak for every employer, but they have to come up with something to sift people. So that's all I'm going to say about that, is that it could potentially hurt them for the processes that are in place. But if they're willing to not let it hurt them and put in the effort to make sure that it doesn't, then I don't see why it would.
Let me give you a really good human resources answer. It depends. There are some instances where completion of a degree from a notable university might make a difference for us. We recruited an individual not too long ago to do regional outreach who had an education at Johns Hopkins. And that was impressive, and we thought for that job that was something that was really interesting and would be of value. But I can also tell you that our chief medical officer is from Case Western Reserve, and most people probably wouldn't equate that with Stanford University. So I think, again, what it boils, sometimes it is really nice. What it boils down to, again, as I think everyone alluded to earlier, is the completion of the four-year degree, or the completion of the master's degree or a PhD, is as much as anything a sign of accomplishment. It's a sign that someone persevered, a sign that someone was able to tackle a challenge and tackle it effectively. I think when you think about an Ivy League education, I think it denotes that probably a higher challenge because fewer people are able to get in. But at the end of the day, many of the same concepts apply. I overcame something. I accomplished something. I put in the time to get it done. And I think that's really important. I would tell you, I'm sure that we have folks on this panel who have really impressive college. I went to Central Washington University. I'm a wildcat. And my master's degree is online. And I would tell you, when I first thought about a master's degree and doing it online, I thought, oh my, that's great. That looks like a diploma mill. But today, here we are a few years later in an online university degree. People say that's a demonstration. So it is about the demonstration. In some instances, yes, it's more impressive. Sometimes you're fortunate and people think they are Washington State University instead of Central Washington University, and that helps you too. But I think overall, it is that you accomplish something, and that's what I would focus on the most. And ultimately, you need to go to the college that has the program that best meets your needs. And my side story with Central, while I, make a joke about people confusing it for Washington State University, I picked Central because U.S. News and World Report rated it as one of the best college values. And for the program that I was looking at, it was one of the highest rated programs in the country. So for me, that was the value.
I heard Mark say earlier too that you have made some good hiring decisions because you looked at beyond just the degree, beyond just the experience, and looked at the character of the people, and that's definitely how I've hired in my 10 plus years of hiring people too. I think the degree denotes the accomplishment, but then there's so much more I want to take into consideration. How are you going to fit into our environment? What unique skills and attributes are you bringing to the table? So I would agree with that, and I would also agree, especially at the bachelor's level, it's such a personal choice because sometimes you want to pick the program that fits you, and you want to pick the college that's going to nurture your whole being. I went to Gonzaga because I'm third generation Gonzaga, and I was honestly very happy for the experience because it brought our family together. I mean, constant references to different experiences that we had.
What's interesting, I think a lot of times, people mistake the quality of an education, like from an Ivy League school, whether it's graduate or postgraduate, as somehow that education looked better on a resume. What's really interesting is a lot of the benefit of those degrees, very bluntly, is the network that it opens up to you. And the fact of the matter is that you're actually looking for a job through alumni and other people who closely identify with that brand and that education, and open up doors for you, which is kind of a unique thing. And so there is definitely some benefit, I think, to that, kind of in the top tier, because you're just developing a network that frankly is invaluable. I think you just have to go out of your way, if you go to that middle 80%, let's say, to make sure that you develop that very same network, and you really go out of your way to meet people, to develop relationships, to really engage kind of at a human level, so that when you're getting out of college, you can literally, in your iPhone, I would almost said in your Rolodex, and I'm not that old. All the kids are probably, what the hell are you talking about? But, literally, and I think that's really important. You just have to work at it, a little bit more. I'll say that from our perspective, we just made an offer to a West Point cadet today. You've got people that have really impressive degrees from really impressive institutions, but what we really tend to value is really their character, whether or not they match up with the values of the organization, that we have, and frankly their work ethic. And I can tell you right now, what I value as the CEO of a company is a person who, they don't have to be the smartest person in the company, but what I really value are the people who have loyalty, who are loyal to our customers, and will do whatever really is necessary in order to complete a project and put the time and the effort and really give it 100% of their best effort every single day, as opposed to somebody who's potentially on paper or even intellectually just a smarter person, but doesn't put in the effort, and doesn't take the time really to fully apply themselves. And so you might get in the door with that, but at the end of the day, you get exposed pretty quickly. If the human resources process is working the way it should be. So.
Well, and I was just going to add made a point that I wanted to reinforce. When we interview, there are really two levels. The first level is something that we would call a minimum qualification. Yes, no, and that takes about 2 minutes at the most. And then we have the interview. Guess where we spend all of our time? On the real interview. And guess where education is? It's in the minimum qualification. Do you have it or do you not? And and typically we don't give a lot of bonus points because it was a nicer sounding university. So where we spend our most time and investment in the interview is, how do you communicate? Can you make decisions? Do you work well with other people? Or can you apply your learning? Those are the things that we look at, just as Mike is alluding to. So at the end of the day, what are you doing to build those characters? You know, for all of you in the room, you've been doing that now for 14 years. You've made good decisions. You've worked with other people. If you've been on a team and it's been successful, it's because you work together with other people. You've been learning. Sometimes it's in the classroom, but you've probably learned a lot on Xbox too. So, you know, you have been doing these things now for 14 plus years. You're doing
I was thinking about what you all said about relationships and networking and some of those things, and having been a Spokane resident my whole life, I think that has been really important to me, to have relationships and to know people and to be able to ask those questions. And Mark, I was reading the Journal of Business, and your CEO, or your boss, if you will, he was recruited by somebody, and they talked about that. They said, well, who do you think would be the person to take over this huge position? And Elaine said, I think I have somebody. So can you talk about, all of you talk about relationships? I mean, 3 of you are transplants, right, to Spokane? Mike, you're from out?
No,
Were you from Spokane? Left and came back. So why Spokane, and did that have anything to do with it? So those relationships and networking, let's talk about that a little bit.
relationships are critical. You know, we have a saying at Providence that usually your coming to Providence is providential. Everyone has a story about getting to Providence, and mine is through relationship, twofold. One, work related. I had done some work with another health system and had been asked to come to Spokane to do a presentation on some work that I had been doing. And I met a few people at Providence, and we stayed in contact. And I reached a point in my career where it was time to maybe look at some other opportunities, maybe look at a different market. And I happened to reach out to one of those individuals and told them I would be interested if you ever have anything available. And literally 2 weeks later, that individual called back and said, Sacred Heart wants to develop an organizational development department. Would you come out and work? Now, the relationship also came, while I'm not a ZAG, my wife is, and we lived in the same community where she was born and raised. I had a 5-year plan, which was to leave that community, and she had a 500-year plan, which was to never leave that community. And when we talked about different career opportunities, she said, there are very few places I would go. I suppose I would go to Spokane. And literally 2 weeks later, that occurred. So the relationships that were built over time are really critical. Some of you have heard the old saying, never burn a bridge, and I can tell you that that's really critical. So whatever you do in life, and particularly when you get into employment, if you're going to leave, do it on really good terms, because that person tomorrow can be very influential. And so I think that's really critical. Even the role I have today is because of the work that I had done over the years at Sacred Heart. I actually had left Sacred Heart for a period of time to work in Renton, our Providence system office, in a different role. When the human resource director position came up, someone approached me and said, I would like you to come back. So I loved the role I had, but I really love the role that I have now because this is our home. We're happy to be here. So those relationships are critical.
What they're referring to is called the hidden job market. I use that term a lot, and you'll hear about it more and more and more. And the whole concept behind that is that that's how you get jobs without applying online. And that used to only exist on the C-level executive level, where they knew they needed an executive. You're never even going to see a job post for a CEO of a company. It's because they go out and they scout and they find people, they identify the right person, they approach them for the job. And that's happening on all levels now. And that's why LinkedIn is so important. If you guys have ever been on it, I think they've opened it up to 14 now. It's ridiculous, but I'm not suggesting going and getting on LinkedIn. I'm just saying that that's why LinkedIn has become so important in the professional world, because it's a way for you to have a professional presence that's available for everybody to see and find. And as long as you package it right, when someone needs somebody special, they're going to go out and look. And especially if they ask their trusted coworkers or their network and they're referred, they can go check you out on LinkedIn, and if they like what they see, they're going to approach you and talk to you. And that's pretty much how you can get a job nowadays without applying, because as I will say to anybody, I think the process is broken because there's so many people applying. It's even for the most qualified, most perfect person, it's really difficult to get through that system and be, sitting in an interview. So as far as relationships and networking go, I think hand in hand goes with making sure that you're packaged and polished and out there and presenting yourself in the way that you want. You're branded. I'm sure that's something else you guys hear all the time. It's no longer just brands for company, it's personal brands, professional brands. Who are you when people look you up, and when they talk to you, what do they see and think about you? Because that could lead to your next opportunity. It's a lot scarier place to be because you never know when those opportunities will present themselves, but that goes back to making sure that you're communicating what you have to offer and to the right people. It comes back to networking. So absolutely, I think relationships are very, very, very critical part of the process, and I think they will become even more critical. And for me, I've always been a transplant where I'm plopped down where who knows where. Sometimes we get little to no notice, and military spouses, that's the reality of our world. So how do you build a network in a place you've never been? So I am pretty aggressive, and sometimes that turns people off, but that's how I have to be. I moved here in August, and I've started a networking group. You can find it on Meetup, and we have 70 people already, and you don't have a network, you build it. So that's the best advice I can give, is just make sure that you're building those relationships, and it starts now. I mean, some of my college friends and roommates and their spouses now, they're my strongest network. They know who I am from the beginning. I mean, I don't have to prove myself to them again. They know who I am. So maintain those relationships, It can't go back to high school. I just hired my buddy from high school. He started his own business. I trust him. I know him. He just made a bunch of bucks off me because of that relationship. So absolutely, it's important.
Well, I just want to thank our panel. We're wrapping it up and running out of time, right, Brian? Oh, you have a question?
Yes, I actually do have
one more question.
One write-in question. First of all, thank you very much for the time and energy that you spent here with us tonight. It's been wonderful. The question is, tonight each of you has had the opportunity to listen to each other and got a chance to share and to learn from each other. As you think about that, what is one thing that you've learned that you will take with you tonight as you go out and continue to lead in our community, to hire and continue to add employable jobs to the region?
One of the things I think that really stuck out to me is the discussion kind of just the concept of a freelance economy and how things are kind of migrating. And it's interesting because we do see that kind of starting to happen, where even though we're a centralized employer where we have an office in LA, we have an office in Chicago, we do our manufacturing in our headquartered here. The fact of the matter is we have more and more remote workers who are engineers, who are service technicians, and they're not in the office every single day. I mean, they've got a great set of skills. Sometimes they're full-time employees, sometimes they're contract employees as well. And just, really kind of we've been seeing that, kind of in our industry, kind of go that direction. But just that concept that's happening really in other industries as well, and that's a trend that you see kind of gaining steam. It's kind of funny, I hadn't really thought about it in that context before, but it's happening, and now I can be probably a little bit more deliberate about nurturing that, and frankly learning more about it.
We just had a pretty robust discussion on networking and how to build your networks and get into that hidden job market. But I also want to say, as we move towards a freelance economy, your network is equally as important, just like with your friends. There's that old adage, you are, look around at your 5 closest friends, that's who you're going to be. I think networks are really important too, because they're the kinds of people that are going to propel you forward intellectually as you maybe chisel out a place for yourself in the market in the freelance, or whether you approach your boss and try to figure out how you can be repurposed within the organization in an entrepreneurial way. And so I think that going forward, I just really believe strongly that it's the network, but it's not just the opportunities that they open up, it's how they change you as a human to the people that you surround yourself with. So people matter, never burn bridges.
And I would concur, I think that was really salient, that freelance, free agent economy. And I think what that creates is there's much more virtual work, as Mike alluded to. One of the things that we all prepare for is that in our future, if your future is in Spokane, be prepared to work with people who aren't in Spokane every single day, which again really reinforces the skills that are necessary to work with a broad spectrum of individuals. I think what also resonates for me as I think about that free agent or freelance economy is, we are a multicultural society. We may not look that way in the truth, but all the more so that we really have to acknowledge the uniqueness of where we work or where we may potentially work. The last thing I would leave you with is what I want to reinforce is you have many of the skills today, and I don't want you to lose sight of that. I hope that's one of the things that you leave with tonight. You have the skills. You're on a journey to developing them further, and I hope that you don't forget that. You have transferable skills today, and you will continue to over your life. So don't negate what you've already done. Just continue to build on that.
For me, every time I get insight into an employer or a business, that's very eye-opening for me. I think that's one thing that I really have to my advantage is all these different employers that I've had, all these different regional experiences and industry experiences, because if you recall, I said that my degree is very regionally specific. So I worked in one industry in one location when I moved. Well, that's not available. So I just switched careers, switched industries. Every time you get insight into how that company operates and works and does things and thinks and what the direction they're going and what's important to them, everything that they're alluding to, it's very enlightening and opens me up to all the opportunities that are out there in the direction that all these different industries are moving, because they have different interests, they have different vision for where they're going in the future. And so I think for me, that's the most beneficial part about being up here, is just listening to that. So I encourage you to do the same through internships or job shadows, or even working at McDonald's, or I worked at Papa Murphy's and the frame store at the mall and T-Ball, and all of those experiences and opportunities open you up to different leadership styles, different ways of operating business, different ways of conducting yourself. So make sure that you open yourself and give yourself that opportunity to have those exposures.
Well, I want to take this opportunity to say thank you to Michelle and Shawna and Mark and Michael, and just if you would do a round of applause for them. This was really very helpful, very helpful.